An Epic History TV PMF Productions collaboration. In 1796, at the height of the French Revolutionary Wars, a young French general took charge of a ragged, demoralised army in northern Italy. It was his first command. Many expected him to fail. Instead, in just 1 month, he won his first brilliant campaign. With astonishing self-confidence, boldness and energy, he led his army to victory after victory, transforming the war in Europe, winning praise from a grateful republic, and forging a legend. This is the story of Napoleon Bonaparte's first campaign, and the dawn of a new age. (1792). Europe is plunged into conflict by revolution in France. At first, it seems this infant republic will be quickly snuffed out by her neighbours. Incredibly, France clings on, thanks to mass mobilization, patriotic fervour, and her traditional military power. In 1795, France occupies the Low Countries, while Prussia and Spain withdraw from the war. But the French Republic still faces a powerful coalition of enemies, which includes the Austrian Empire and kingdoms of Piedmont, Sardinia, Naples, and Great Britain, as well as a counter-revolutionary revolt in the Vendée region of western France. In Paris, the most extreme revolutionaries had been toppled, sent to the guillotine, as they had sent so many before them. France is now governed by the Directory, a more moderate 5-man committee, which quickly wins a reputation for corruption and inefficiency. Nevertheless, in 1796, they plan a major military offensive to knock their most dangerous adversary, Austria, out of the war. The two main efforts will be made along the Rhine by powerful armies under General Jourdan and General Moreau. A third effort, of which much less is expected, will be made in northern Italy. The French Army of Italy is a poor cousin, starved of money and supplies, stripped of troops to reinforce French forces on the Rhine. But its fortunes are about to change. On the 2nd of March 1796, the Directory appoint a new commander to lead the army, one of France's youngest generals, Napoleon Bonaparte. Napoleon arrives at the Army of Italy's headquarters in Nice on the 25th of March. He is just 26 years old. 2 years have passed since he masterminded French victory at the Siege of Toulon. Since then, his fortunes have been mixed. A short spell as artillery commander in Italy, 10 days in jail when his political patrons fell from power. He then refused to serve in the Vendée, fighting French counter-revolutionaries, leading to several months' unemployment in Paris. Then, an extraordinary break. 13 Vendémiaire, Paris. A royalist mob threatens to storm the national government. Napoleon is the closest general to hand and put in charge of its defense. He disperses the crowds with brutal efficiency and is acclaimed savior of the revolution. A grateful Directory promotes Napoleon to General of Division and awards him command of the Army of Italy. On the 9th of March, he marries his great love, Joséphine de Beauharnais, and leaves for the front 2 days later. There are French generals in Italy with a better claim to command than Napoleon. Serrurier a professional soldier who first saw action in the 7 Years' War, a decade before Napoleon was born. Augereau, a tough, experienced soldier, bold tactician, and committed Republican. And Massena, risen from the ranks, fearless, tireless, hero of the Battle of Lonato against the Austrians the year before. All three would later become marshals of Napoleon's empire. For now, Napoleon seems to these veterans young and underqualified, a political appointment, embarrassingly infatuated with his new wife. But there is something about the Corsican. As Massena observed, his small size and puny face did not put him in their favour. But as soon as he donned his general's hat, he seemed to grow by 2 feet. Napoleon impresses above all with his tireless energy, and he has much to do. His army is organised into Massena's advance guard of 2 divisions, one led by a hard-fighting Swiss general La Harpe, and the other by Meunier, whom Napoleon soon decides is incompetent. The main body comprises the divisions of Augereau, Serrurier, and 2 smaller divisions under Macquart and Garnier. The cavalry is led by General Stengel. But the army of Italy has been shockingly neglected by the Directory. The men are hungry and unpaid, with a few units on the verge of mutiny. Some men don't even have shoes or muskets. Napoleon inspects the troops and studies reports. He enforces discipline and breaks up rotten units. He is assisted by his aide-de-camp, Junot, Marmont, and a dashing cavalry colonel, Joachim Murat. As emperor, Napoleon will make 2 of these men dukes, and 1 a king. His most valuable assistant is his new chief of staff, General Berthier, who helps him to reorganize the army's supply system and scour southern France for food, transport, and forage. The situation begins to improve. But Napoleon knows what will really rejuvenate his ragged divisions: victory in battle and the promise of plunder. Napoleon has spent 2 years studying the situation in northern Italy and the history of past wars here. He has developed clear plans on how the campaign must be fought. Now, he will put them into action. Napoleon, with 38,000 troops, outnumbers the Piedmontese and the Austrian army. But if they combine, he will be outnumbered, so he must prevent this at all costs. His plan bears all the hallmarks of what will become known as the Napoleonic art of war. A bold, rapid advance, not against the expected target, Genoa, but Dago. Here he will occupy the central position and prize his enemies apart. He knows that when threatened, the Piedmontese will retreat on their capital Turin, the Austrians on Milan. With his enemies divided, unable to support each other, he can defeat each in detail. Napoleon's plan will be aided by the fragility of the Austro-Piedmontese alliance. They regard each other with deep distrust after years of rivalry. The new Austrian commander, General Beaulieu, is experienced and was once considered energetic, but he is now 70 years old and does not know Italy. He is convinced the French will target Genoa, the port used by the British to supply their coalition allies. So much so that he rejects Piedmontese plans for close cooperation. Their troops remain scattered across mountain passes in a general defense against invasion. On the 4th of April, Napoleon moves his headquarters forward to Albenga in preparation for his offensive. But Beaulieu strikes first. On the 10th of April, Austrian troops take Voltri to disrupt the expected French attack on Genoa. The small French garrison falls back to join Massena's advance guard at Savona. But Beaulieu's fixation with Genoa is playing into Napoleon's hands. Dago, with its vital crossroads that link the Piedmontese and Austrian armies, is covered by just 8,000 men of Argenteau's corps. Mountainous terrain means Beaulieu can only march to Argenteau's aid via Acqui, more than 20 miles to the north. What's more, Argenteau has orders to take French positions at Montenotte as a diversion for the attack at Voltri. But the French cling on courageously. Corporal Roache particularly distinguishes himself, exposing himself to enemy fire to shoot down on the enemy. His commander, Colonel Rampont, tells his men, "Here we must conquer or die," a moment which quickly enters French military folklore. It's the perfect setup for Napoleon. The enemy's attention is focused on Voltri, and Argenteau's corps has been left dangerously exposed. He swings into action, sending La Harpe's division to reinforce Rampont's troops, while Massena makes a tough night march across steep ravines in rain and fog to turn Argenteau's right flank. By dawn, the Austrians are outnumbered, outflanked, and under heavy attack. They retreat in disarray. Napoleon orders Massena to move on Dago, while he turns his attention to the Piedmontese. But Augereau's advance gets held up at Cosseria. The old castle is held by Piedmontese and Croatian grenadiers. The French launch frontal attacks into withering fire and suffer hundreds of casualties. When the colonel of the 18th Demi-Brigade is killed, a 26-year-old Louis-Gabriel Suchet takes over command. "I have never seen fire like it," wrote Marmont, Napoleon's aide-de-camp. Despite heroic resistance, the hopelessly outnumbered garrison surrenders the next day. With Serrurier's division also advancing from the south, Piedmontese commander General Colli has little choice but to abandon his position at Montezemolo. The same day, under Napoleon's watchful eye, Massena takes Dago. But while La Harpe's division moves off to reinforce Augereau, hungry French troops left in Dago turn to plunder and pillage. No one spots Colonel Vukasovic, a tough Croatian commander, approaching with 3,000 reinforcements. He attacks at dawn, routing the French and retaking Dago with ease. It requires the recall of La Harpe's division and another day of heavy combat before Vukasovic can be driven out of Dago. A bayonet charge led by 27-year-old Colonel Lannes wins particular praise from General Bonaparte. Napoleon has won 3 victories in 4 days. The marches and battles have been grueling, but he has achieved his first objective. The Austrians are regrouping at Acqui and will soon retreat to Alessandria. They can offer no support to the Piedmontese. And so General Colli orders another withdrawal to a strong defensive position behind the Corsalia River. Napoleon orders an immediate attack. Augereau's division on the right, Serrurier on the left, Massena in support. But the French, under heavy fire, struggle to cross the swollen river with its steep banks. When Serrurier's troops finally get into San Michele, they immediately begin looting the town and are thrown out by a counterattack. Despite his success, Colli is still heavily outnumbered and fears encirclement. The following evening, he begins a covert withdrawal to Mondovì. But Napoleon is not deceived by the fake campfires. Patrols confirm his suspicions. The Piedmontese are pulling back. Though his troops are exhausted, wet and hungry, he launches them after the fleeing enemy. Colli's troops are caught before they can establish a new defensive line. The brave and popular General Dicat is killed. Retreat turns to rout. The French enter Mondovì in triumph, where at last, briefly, they can eat and rest. General Colli, his defeated troops scattered and demoralised, requests an armistice. Napoleon declines, as his troops descend from the mountains into the fertile plain of Piedmont. Destitute and starved, French soldiers now plunder the Italian countryside freely. Brigadier General Joubert is among those frustrated by the men's conduct. Everything would go very well if the soldiers did not abandon themselves to pillage. Not a day passes without some looters being shot. Despite this severity, the mania doesn't stop. The rural folk are arming themselves. Napoleon condemns such behaviour, but his orders have limited impact, especially as everyone knows Generals Massena and Augereau to be two of the greatest offenders. On the 25th of April, French troops enter Cherasco, just 30 miles south of the Piedmontese capital, Turin. Meanwhile, General Beaulieu is at long last marching to Piedmont's aid. But he is a week late, and when he learns that Piedmont has opened negotiations with the enemy, he withdraws his troops in disgust, planning to take up new positions along the Po River. Austrian troops join in the plunder of Piedmontese villages as they go. Victor Amadeus III, King of Piedmont Sardinia, sees no option but to accept Bonaparte's terms for an armistice. Piedmont must give up the strategic fortresses at Cuneo and either Alessandria or Tortona, leaving the country virtually defenceless. The final peace treaty, signed 3 weeks later in Paris, cedes Nice and Savoie to France, and grants free passage to French armies. Napoleon has ended the 4-year war with Piedmont in less than 3 weeks. The army of Italy has little time to rest on its laurels. 4 days later, having received 7,000 reinforcements and fresh supplies, it's on the move again. Napoleon plans to invade the rich province of Lombardy, ruled by the Emperor of Austria, and defeat Beaulieu's army. But first he must cross the Po River, which is closely watched by Austrian forces. It will prove one of Napoleon's most brilliant maneuvers. Massena is ordered to make conspicuous preparations to cross the river near Sale, assembling boats and building gun batteries. Meanwhile, Napoleon has formed a new elite brigade, 5,000 grenadiers, carabiniers and chasseurs to act as the army's advance guard under the command of General d'Allemagne. This force is ordered to march rapidly east to Piacenza and cover 40 miles in just 36 hours. They are followed by La Harpe's division, then Augereau and the cavalry. Beaulieu receives reports that French troops are moving east and begins to redeploy his forces, while remaining conscious that there are still French troops that might cross the Po as far west as Valenza. This uncertainty makes it impossible for him to concentrate his forces. What's more, he's completely underestimated the scale and speed of Napoleon's move. The French advance guard, with Colonel Lannes in the lead, crosses the Po on the 7th of May, chasing off Austrian patrols that are the only opposition. By the next morning, most of La Harpe's and Augereau's divisions and the cavalry are across, consolidating the French bridgehead, while Massena and Serrurier move to the crossing as fast as they can. Men of General Liptai's division are the closest Austrian troops. They take up defensive positions at Formio, but are overwhelmed by the French attack. That evening, Beaulieu's advance guard arrives, expecting to reinforce Liptai. Instead, they blunder into La Harpe's division. In confused night fighting, General La Harpe is shot dead, possibly by friendly fire. Napoleon regards him as one of the army's best generals, and his loss a great blow. Beaulieu, realizing that the French have crossed the Po in force and now threaten to cut him off, orders a rapid withdrawal east. Milan is to be sacrificed. The great fortress of Mantua will be his next refuge. The French advance guard is soon in pursuit. On the morning of the 10th of May, they catch the Austrian rearguard at Lodi. French troops chase the Austrians across town and over the town's 200-yard bridge over the River Adda. But when they try to follow, they find the bridge is swept by fire from 14 guns. Its far end is held by 3 battalions of Croatian infantry. Several more battalions and cavalry squadrons are behind them in reserve, around 6,500 men in total. Napoleon soon arrives and positions guns to bombard the Austrians on the far bank. An artillery duel rages for much of the afternoon. Napoleon sends Beaumont's cavalry brigade upstream to look for a ford so they can cross the river and flank the Austrian defences. But he grows impatient. Massena's division has begun to arrive from the south, bringing his strength up to 15,000 men and 30 guns. Napoleon makes a speech to the infantry, taunting them, daring them to take the bridge, then orders them forward. To cries of "Vive la République!" the hardened 2nd Carabinier Battalion leads the charge. They come under torrential fire from the Austrian guns. But urged on by Napoleon, Berthier, Massena, Lannes and others, French infantry surge across, under and around the bridge. Faced with this irresistible onslaught, the Austrian front line crumbles. And with French cavalry across the river to the north, the rest of the Austrian rearguard begins an orderly withdrawal. Five days after his victory at Lodi, Napoleon leads his army into the city of Milan. They are welcomed by cheering crowds. Though in reality, Italians are deeply divided in their attitudes towards the French. After Lodi, French soldiers have a new nickname for their general, Le Petit Caporal, the Little Corporal. It's a term of affection, because he gets his hands dirty, even aiming the guns himself, the job of an artillery corporal. In just a month, Napoleon has transformed a war-weary, dishevelled and demoralised army into a victorious fighting force, brimming with esprit de corps and eager for further conquests. While he, in his first campaign, has demonstrated extraordinary energy, mastery of detail, brilliant military intuition. Above all, indomitable self-belief. It is this quality that inspires his soldiers to risk their lives for glory, for the Republic, and for the man they will one day acclaim their emperor. May 1796. The French Revolutionary Wars have entered their 5th year. And on what most consider to be a secondary front, there has been a stunning development. A 26-year-old general of the French Republic, Napoleon Bonaparte, has waged a lightning campaign across northern Italy, defeating the Kingdom of Piedmont, Sardinia, and driving the Austrians across Lombardy. 2,000 Austrian troops remain holed up in Milan's citadel, but they cannot prevent his triumphal entry into the city on the 15th of May. Now the French general holds court at the Palazzo Serbelloni, issuing decrees on behalf of the Directory in Paris, while his troops enjoy several days' rest. Lombardy is to be reorganized as a French client state, known as the Lombardic Republic. Political and economic reforms sweep away the old Austrian state, to the delight of Italian intellectuals in cities like Milan. But the French also demand 20 million francs to help pay for the war, while their troops requisition vast quantities of food, horses, cattle, and boots. Most inflammatory are their attacks on the property and dignity of the Catholic Church, which enrage Italian priests and peasants, and are a gift to anti-French propagandists. On the 23rd of May, as Napoleon's troops set off in pursuit of the Austrians, revolt breaks out in Pavia. The next day there are riots in Milan. Napoleon races back to the city, where order is soon restored. But on the road to Pavia, at Binasco, he encounters 1,000 armed rebels. Colonel Lannes' grenadiers rout the peasants, killing 100 and burning the village. A terrible example, which will be effective, Napoleon writes. Pavia is retaken the next day, with little opposition. A score of ringleaders, including several priests, are shot. Hundreds of hostages are taken from prominent local families to ensure future cooperation. Napoleon resumes his advance east. His army now organized into 4 divisions: Quilmain's advance guard, Augereau, Massena, and Serrurier. General Berlioz's Austrian army holds the line of the Mincio River, with Lake Garda on his right and the great fortress of Mantua on his left. This, together with the fortresses at Peschiera, Verona, and Lagnago, forms the famous quadrilateral, 4 bastions that cement Austria's grip on northern Italy. But once more, Berlioz can't get a read on Napoleon's movements. He scatters his troops, trying to defend 4 potential crossing points, and is further distracted by fake preparations to cross Lake Garda by boat. In fact, Napoleon has decided to cross the Mincio at Borghetto, and when Quilmain's advance guard arrives, they find the bridge defended by a single battalion of infantry and handful of hussars. The Austrians are soon driven back, but a sudden counterattack nearly bags General Bonaparte himself. A possibly dramatized account has him hopping over fences with one boot on to evade the hussars. This lucky escape leads to the formation of an elite cavalry detachment to act as Napoleon's personal escort. They are named the Compagnie des Guides à Cheval. Their commander is a young cavalry captain named Jean-Baptiste Bessières. In time, this unit will become the famous chasseurs à cheval of the Imperial Guard, the Emperor's ever-present bodyguard on campaign. Taken by surprise by the crossing at Borghetto, Boglio begins a withdrawal to a new defensive line in the Adige Valley. However, at Mantua, he leaves behind a reinforced garrison, well supplied and ready to withstand a siege of at least 2 months. Napoleon cannot bypass Mantua, its garrison is too powerful. But the fortress city will be a tough nut to crack. Its old walls surrounded on 3 sides by a lake and on the other by malarial marshland. The most unhealthy place in Italy, Napoleon tells the Directory. His biggest problem is his lack of heavy siege artillery. Most of these guns are in Milan, bombarding the Austrians, still holed up in the citadel. More guns were supposed to arrive by sea, but have been intercepted by British warships, commanded by a certain Commodore Horatio Nelson. Since April, Napoleon has launched 3 successful offensives, marched more than 200 miles, and won 10 battles. But finally, outside the walls of Mantua, he is brought to a halt. And the demands on his limited force are growing. He must maintain the siege of Mantua, even though its guns outnumber his own and no direct assault can be made. He must protect his lines of communication back to France and guard against further revolt in Lombardy. And he must be ready to face the Austrians, who are receiving reinforcements from Germany and will soon counterattack. To add to his problems, the French Directory demands that he lead an expedition to central and southern Italy. He's to threaten military occupation unless these states cough up huge sums to help fund the French war effort. Napoleon vehemently opposes the idea. Marching troops the length of Italy in high summer, he warns, will end in sickness and death. Fortunately, strong words alone persuade Naples to sign an armistice. And in the end, Napoleon doesn't even have to go as far as Rome. The French march through the Duchy of Modena, the Papal States, and the Grand Duchy of Tuscany, raising more than 40 million francs in tribute from states that are powerless to resist. Napoleon dines in Florence with the Grand Duke before returning to Milan. There he is reunited with his wife, Josephine, who's arrived from Paris, discreetly accompanied by her new lover. Napoleon does not linger in Milan. Its citadel has finally fallen, freeing up his siege guns. His troops have seized another 150 guns from the forts of central Italy. Napoleon can now make serious plans to take Mantua, and he has no time to lose. In the Tyrol, the reinforced Austrian army is beginning to stir, under a new commander. Boglio is gone. Now, 72-year-old Field Marshal Count von Wurmser is in command. A courageous cavalryman, vigorous beyond his years, and determined to avenge Austrian defeats in Italy. Since crossing the Mincio, Napoleon has reorganized and redeployed his forces. General Massena's division is near Rivoli, watching the road to the Tyrol. 2 of his brigades, under General Sorre, are at Salò, watching the western side of Lake Garda. General Despinois' division is in support at Peschiera. General Augereau's division is around Legnago, watching the eastern approaches, while Quilmain's cavalry mounts patrols. General Serrurier's division carries out the siege of Mantua itself. But Napoleon's hopes for a rapid conclusion to the siege are in vain. The Austrian garrison conducts a skillful and active defense, raiding French entrenchments and seizing supplies. Murat, recently promoted to brigadier general, plans to lead a group of men in Austrian uniform across the lake at night to take the guards by surprise. But the operation's abandoned when the water level suddenly drops. The French step up their bombardment of the city, firing more than 1,000 cannonballs and mortar shells in one 6-hour period. Mantua is being battered to pieces, but its walls are not yet breached. Napoleon is out of time. Field Marshal Wurmser is finally marching to Mantua's aid. He has divided his army into 4 columns. 2 central columns are advancing down the Adige Valley directly towards Mantua. Another column to the east is making a wide flanking march, while a 4th column, under General Kostanovic, advances down the western shore of Lake Garda, planning to seize Brescia and cut Napoleon's line of retreat. Massena comes under heavy attack and, severely outnumbered, abandons Rivoli and begins a fighting retreat. As soon as the news reaches Napoleon, he races to Castelnuovo, ordering Augereau, Despinois and Quilmain to join him as fast as possible. But suddenly, it is Kostanovic's column that's emerging as the greatest threat. General Saue's troops at Salo are heavily outnumbered. They put up a stiff resistance, but are forced to withdraw. The next day, Austrian troops surprise the French at Brescia. They take the town, as well as an army hospital containing 2,000 French sick and wounded. Even Napoleon's wife, Josephine, en route to Brescia, is nearly captured in the chaos. Wurmser has wrong-footed Napoleon. Already outnumbered, he's lost 5,000 casualties. His left flank is in tatters, and there's a real possibility he may be encircled. It's the greatest crisis he has faced as an army commander, and will force him to make an agonizing decision. On the 31st of July, after 2 months of blood, sweat and sacrifice, General Serrurier is ordered to abandon the siege of Mantua. He is to send 2 of his brigades to reinforce Massena and Augereau, and withdraw with the rest of his troops to guard the army's line of retreat. 179 guns, plus ammunition and supplies which cannot be moved, are to be buried or tipped into the marshes. Napoleon needs every man he can get, because in the midst of the crisis, he has spotted an opportunity. Kostanovic's advance has caught him off guard, but Lake Garda separates him from the rest of the Austrian army. Napoleon will concentrate his forces against Kostanovic, beat him in battle, then pivot again to take on Wurmser. The French divisions are soon on the move. Kostanovic's troops reach Lonato, but here they encounter Massena's vanguard. The Austrians come under heavy attack, and with French reinforcements arriving, they have to pull back. The next day, the French retake Brescia, along with most of their supplies, sick and wounded. Then Napoleon catches a lucky break. Wurmser has been on Massena's heels, harrying his rear guard as far as Peschiera. But now he receives reports there are French forces massing between him and Mantua. Mantua is his priority, so he swings south, away from Kostanovic, towards a city Napoleon has already abandoned. By the time Wurmser realizes his error, it's too late. He has gifted Napoleon 24 crucial hours. A blunder, for which he will pay dearly. The 3rd of August sees confused fighting west of Lake Garda. One French brigade slips through the wooded ravines unnoticed, straight into Salo, causing havoc behind the Austrian lines. But the Austrians repel 3 attacks on Gavardo, and all seems to be going well, until their own advance meets Massena's division at Lonato. Massena's counterattack is led by the 32nd Demi Brigade, which is becoming known as one of the Army of Italy's most feared units. "Bayonets only," Napoleon calls out, "and you, 32nd, maintain your glorious reputation." The lead Austrian brigade is routed. Colonel Junot, though wounded 6 times, accepts their commander's surrender. Kostanovich's force has been mauled. Fearing for the rest of his command, and with no word from Wurmser, he decides he must march back around Lake Garda to rejoin the army. The same day, 15 miles to the south, General Augereau's division fights an aggressive rearguard action near Castiglione, keeping Wurmser at bay while Napoleon deals with Kostanovic. Augereau begins with a bold attack on General Liptay's vanguard, driving it back to high ground near Solferino. But here, Liptay receives steady reinforcements as the rest of the Austrian army begins to arrive. Augereau keeps up the pressure, preventing an Austrian advance. And though there's a late scare when enemy cavalry sweep around his left flank, they are unsupported and soon pull back. For Augereau and his men, it is a long day of heroic action against a superior force, one which Napoleon will never forget. 12 years later, as emperor, he will make Augereau Duke of Castiglione, and always remind his critics, he saved us that day. Nevertheless, by nightfall, Augereau's division is at breaking point. "Our soldiers are exhausted from fatigue and hunger. If you don't send me reinforcements, I won't be able to hold out." Next morning, French troops renew the attack on Kostanovic, and quickly discover he's beating a hasty retreat. A major disaster is narrowly avoided when 3 lost Austrian battalions stumble into Napoleon's headquarters at Lonato. They call on the general to surrender. Napoleon responds by loudly ordering his grenadiers and artillery into position, then demands that the Austrians surrender to him or be put to the sword. It's a bold bluff. Few of his troops are anywhere near. But the Austrians meekly lay down their arms. As Napoleon swings his army round to take on Wurmser, the Austrian must decide whether to stand his ground or fall back to a stronger line behind the Mincio River. He chooses to stay put. By engaging Napoleon, he hopes to buy time for Kostanovic to regroup and resume his advance, and for Mantua to be resupplied. His reasoning is sound, but his intelligence is out of date, and he's underestimated the speed at which Napoleon's forces will move. At dawn on the 5th of August, the Austrian army is 4 miles east of Castiglione, formed up in 2 lines, its northern flank anchored on the village of Solferino, its southern flank on a well-fortified redoubt at Monte Mediolanum. Napoleon faces him with Massena's division in the north, Augereau's division in the centre, and Kilmain's cavalry in the south. He's also formed an elite unit of grenadiers and cavalry to be held back for the decisive moment. Napoleon doesn't seem to have much of an advantage. But he has 10,000 more troops converging rapidly on the battlefield. 5,000 under General Despinois, marching from Brescia. 5,000 more under General Fiorella, coming from the south. To buy time for these reinforcements to arrive, and to lure Wurmser out of position, Napoleon orders Massena and Augereau to attack. There is a short exchange of fire. Then the French begin a feigned retreat. The Austrians take the bait, some units advancing off the high ground, while Wurmser extends his right wing, looking to outflank Massena's division. Around 9 AM, the sound of gunfire from the south alerts both sides to Fiorella's arrival, behind the Austrian left flank. Napoleon immediately orders Augereau and Massena to attack again, in earnest. Despinois' troops arrive to join the assault. But Napoleon has sprung his trap too early. Wurmser is not yet fully committed, and reacts swiftly. He organizes a new line to fend off Fiorella, and hurriedly recalls his right wing. But he cannot save the redoubt at Monte Mediolanum. Napoleon's aide-de-camp, Major Marmont, leads forward a battery to blast the position. His guns open a devastating cannonade, clearing the way for an attack. Around 10 AM, the reserve grenadiers charge forward with bayonets fixed, sweeping the Austrians off the hill. Meanwhile, to the north, the 4th and 5th demi-brigades surge onto the Solferino heights and seize the redoubt before Pozzacatana. Carried forward by their momentum, they storm the Solferino tower and village beyond, the shaken enemy falling back in disarray. The Austrians are hard-pressed along the line, and now French cavalry and Fiorella's troops threaten to cut off their retreat. While Napoleon is active, energized, urging troops forward, Wurmser seems to go into shock. A French émigré serving with him recalled, "He watched without seeing anything, saying anything, hearing anything. This brave old man, his head covered with white hair, did not think anymore." Finally, Wurmser orders a general retreat, back across the Mincio River, covered by their cavalry and some late Austrian reinforcements. The French pursuit quickly peters out. After a week of forced marches in stifling heat, with little to eat or drink, Napoleon's men are close to collapse. But their general is content with what they have achieved. Wurmser's army finds temporary refuge behind the Mincio River. But Napoleon immediately resumes the attack. Massena is sent north to relieve the French garrison at Peschiera and threaten Wurmser's line of retreat. The Austrian general has had enough. After ensuring the garrison of Mantua is fully resupplied and reinforced, he begins his withdrawal to the Tyrol to regroup and rethink. The French nip at his heels all the way. Napoleon has just endured his toughest challenge yet as an army commander. And though initially wrong-footed by his adversary, he's displayed brilliant flexibility and his usual energy to weather the crisis and then triumph. But Mantua remains the key to Italy, and while it stands unconquered, the Austrians will do everything in their power to save it. Wurmser will be back, and when he returns, he'll find himself on a collision course with Napoleon, as he launches his own attack on Austria itself. August 1796. The war between France's infant republic and the coalition seems to be tipping in France's favour. In the Vendée, General Hoche has brought the 3-year royalist revolt to an end. This appalling civil war has cost an estimated 165,000 lives and is the bloodiest chapter of the French Revolution. Bourbon Spain allies with France. They will combine forces against their common enemy, Great Britain. In Germany, the armies of General Jourdan and General Moreau have crossed the Rhine and are advancing on Vienna. While in Italy, Napoleon's stunning victory at Castiglione has sent the Austrians scurrying back to the Tyrol. Napoleon can now resume his siege of Mantua, the key to Italy. But he'll have to start over. The Austrians have used the interlude to drag away his heavy guns and demolish his siege works. In summer, the pestilential marshes that surround the city are lethal. The Austrian garrison has been decimated by disease, mostly malaria. General Serrurier, commanding the French siege, also contracts the disease. He returns to France to recover and is replaced by General Sauge. Sickness and a shortage of equipment once more plague the French army in Italy. Even the heroic General Massena asks to be replaced, citing ill health and exhaustion. Napoleon rejects his request. Despite these problems, the Directory in Paris orders Napoleon to attack as part of a grand strategic offensive against Austria. He is to break through to Innsbruck, join forces with Moreau's Army of the Rhine, then together invade Austria and force Emperor Francis to sue for peace. Napoleon faces an enemy of roughly equal size. So he plans to use speed and concentration of force to fall upon Austrian troops in the Adige Valley and clear the path northwards. His opponent, Austrian Field Marshal von Wurmser, is under immense pressure to relieve Mantua. His staff believe that recent fighting has left the French army shattered and incapable of offensive operations, so the Austrians plan to make their own advance. Rather than try to force his way past French troops in the Adige Valley, Wurmser will keep Davidovich in a defensive role, while he leads a wide outflanking march via the Brenta Valley and Bassano to reach Mantua from the east. There he will link up with its garrison. And when Napoleon comes south to face him, he will be caught between two Austrian armies. The Austrians begin their advance on the 1st of September. French forces begin their advance the following day. Massena pushes up the Adige Valley, with Augereau taking a tougher, mountainous route on his right. General Vaubois marches around Lake Garda to join them, with one brigade crossing by boat. The forward Austrian outposts are driven in, and by the 4th, 3 French divisions are converging on Davidovich's heavily outnumbered force, near Rovereto. General Victor leads the main attack straight up the road, driving back the enemy centre. Meanwhile, French light infantry swarm up the sides of the valley to outflank the enemy. It's a tactic the French will use again and again to force the Austrians out of strong positions in the narrow passes. The Austrians are driven up the valley towards Davidovich's main camp at Caldiero. As Napoleon remarks, this position should have been impregnable. Sheer mountains either side of a valley floor that's just a few hundred yards wide. A small castle and wall add to the formidable natural defences. But its defence has been left to a single, shaken Austrian regiment, which is given no time to prepare. When the French hit them with speed and numbers, they give way. Massena's troops break through to the main Austrian camp, where soldiers, expecting a much longer respite, are preparing dinner. The arrival of the French sparks chaos and confusion. The Austrian escape route is immediately jammed with fleeing troops, wagons and guns. The French round up around 3,000 prisoners, alongside 25 guns and 7 standards. Napoleon had thought that he faced the whole Austrian army around Trento, but now, speaking with prisoners and locals, he learns that Wurmser and half his army have set off down the Brenta Valley. Destination unknown. With typical speed and decisiveness, Napoleon tears up the plan to join Moreau at Innsbruck and orders a pursuit. If he can catch and destroy Wurmser before he reaches safety, the war in Italy will be won. When Wurmser receives news of the fiasco at Caldiero, his troops are already strung out along the Brenta Valley, with his vanguard approaching Vicenza. There is nothing to gain by turning back. He orders Davidovich to hold the passes north, assuming they are Napoleon's objective, and pushes on to Mantua. But Napoleon is not going north. He orders Vaubois to pursue Davidovich and keep him blocked in, while Augereau's division leads the rest of the army down the narrow, funnel-like Brenta Valley in pursuit of the Austrians. The army of Italy is brimming with confidence and momentum, and marches much faster than the Austrians. A small force at Levico offers token resistance, before it's bundled down the Brenta Valley. The next day, French light infantry rout a 3,000-strong Austrian rearguard at Primulano, taking most of them prisoner. Wurmser decides to make another stand at Bassano, where the valley opens into flat plains. With Colonel Lannes leading the charge, the Austrians are driven back, then chased into town by Murat's cavalry. Amid panic, chaos and blocked roads, the French take another 2,000 prisoners, including an Austrian general and 30 guns. Wurmser is in disarray, down to 12,000 men, outnumbered 2-1, with part of his force retreating in the wrong direction towards Trieste. His only hope is to reach Mantua. The two armies are in a foot race, but for the first time in the campaign, Austrian soldiers outmarch their exhausted French counterparts. Wurmser leaves a small garrison at the fortress of Legnago to slow Augereau's pursuit. Forging ahead, Massena manages to block the Austrians' path at Cherea. But General Ott makes a determined attack and clears the road, taking 700 French prisoners and 7 guns. It is a rare defeat for Massena. With the help of a local informant, Wurmser then finds an intact, unguarded bridge across the Tiorne River and reaches the outskirts of Mantua on the 13th of September. His army has been saved from destruction by the skin of its teeth. Napoleon has failed to prevent Wurmser reaching Mantua. But he knows that if he can bottle him up inside the city, it will put intolerable strain on its supplies. For that reason, Wurmser wants to keep his army outside the city walls, free to maneuver, and, crucially, forage for supplies in the surrounding country. The next morning, as Augereau accepts the surrender of the Austrian garrison at Legnago, Massena tries a surprise attack at Due Castelli. But it's overambitious. His men have not had time to recover from their long march, and the Austrians fight bravely. The following day, Napoleon launches a much larger, coordinated attack. Sauge's division advances on the right. His troops are soon in heavy fighting with Ott's brigade around the Villa La Favorita. Augereau's division, under temporary command of General Bonn, advances along the Mincio River, trying to turn the Austrian right flank. When Wurmser sends reserves from his centre to strengthen both flanks, Massena's concealed division launches its attack. Victor and Rampont lead the way with their veteran demi-brigades. Austrian cavalry hurl themselves at the French, but are beaten off. Heavy fighting rages on the outskirts of Mantua for much of the afternoon. Finally, Wurmser's centre begins to crumble, and the French take San Giorgio. Much of the Austrian right wing is cut off. Many are forced to surrender, while others flee into the lake. With the Austrian line shattered, Wurmser orders his men to fall back to the safety of Mantua's citadel. The troops that were to have rescued Mantua are now trapped alongside its garrison. By early October, the French have cut off the city and resumed their siege. Conditions inside Mantua deteriorate rapidly. Disease, wounds and malnutrition kill on average nearly 100 Austrian soldiers every day for 6 weeks. Civilians are reduced to eating rats and horses. Napoleon, meanwhile, returns to Milan, sending his aide-de-camp, Major Marmont, to Paris to present 22 captured Austrian standards to the Directory. But elsewhere, the war has not been going so well for France. Archduke Charles, younger brother of the Emperor Francis, has defeated General Jourdan's army twice in 2 weeks. It and General Moreau's Army of the Rhine are forced to retreat back to the frontier. These setbacks mean Napoleon will get very few of the reinforcements he's so urgently requested. He and his men are exhausted. Many of them are sick. They must contain an enormous and increasingly desperate garrison in Mantua, with the certain knowledge that the Austrians will try again soon to save the city. And there are diplomatic concerns which also trouble Napoleon. In Rome, the Pope stirs animosity against the French, citing their treatment of the Catholic Church in the territories they administer. These now include the Cispadane Republic, formed in part from the Duchy of Modena, which Napoleon has abolished for colluding with the enemy. There is also the lingering threat that Naples may rejoin the war at a critical moment to stab him in the back. So, to secure his southern flank, Napoleon concludes a comprehensive peace treaty with Naples without bothering to consult the Directory. It's actions like this that feed the whispers in Paris. This popular young general's ambition seems limitless. Might he not one day prove a dangerous political player? But such talk will be moot if Napoleon fails in Italy. That autumn, as Austrian troops march once more to the relief of Mantua, he will face his most skilled opponent yet, Feldzugmeister Józef Alvinczy, the first man to defeat Napoleon Bonaparte in battle. October 1796. 6 months have passed since General Napoleon Bonaparte took command of the French army of Italy. In that time, he's led a series of brilliant operations against the Austrians and won a string of battles. Now he appears close to final victory. He's driven Austrian field forces off the plains of northern Italy, back towards the Alps, while his troops have the great fortress city of Mantua, the key to Italy, under close siege. Mantua's oversized Austrian garrison is nearing starvation and riddled with disease. Napoleon appeals to its commander, Field Marshal von Wurmser, to surrender. The brave should be facing danger, not swamp plague, he jibes. But Wurmser is a tough old veteran. He will not yield while any glimmer of hope remains. And he knows that to the north, Austria is gathering fresh troops to march to his aid. True, many are Grentz battalions, a type of Habsburg frontier militia, poorly drilled and short of officers. But they help raise the strength of the Austrian field army to 44,000. And they have a new general to lead them, Feldzeugmeister or Lieutenant General Józef Alvinczy. The 61-year-old Hungarian was once military tutor to Emperor Francis himself, and is regarded as diligent, sharp, and brave. He and his staff draw up plans for a fresh offensive to rescue Wurmser and Mantua. Alvinczy and Kostanovic will lead the main column, 26,000 strong, from Friuli to Bassano, then onwards to Mantua. Davidovic's corps, reinforced to 18,000, will retake Trento and push south through the Adige Valley. The two forces will link up at the earliest opportunity. Meanwhile, Wurmser, who can muster just 12,000 fit men from the Mantua garrison, will launch powerful sorties to pin down as many French units as possible. Napoleon, by contrast, has received very few reinforcements from France. His weary divisions are suffering from shortages and sickness, and will be outnumbered on every front. Alvinczy begins his advance on the 22nd of October. The following day, the heavens open, drenching troops, swelling rivers, and reducing roads to mud. For the time being, Napoleon is content to observe the enemy struggle forward in such conditions, knowing the effort will exhaust his infantry and disrupt supplies. On the 2nd of November, fighting breaks out north of Trento, where Napoleon has ordered Vaubois to attack. He wants to keep Davidovich bottled up, but Vaubois is heavily outnumbered, and his attack fails. Vaubois begins pulling back to Caldiero, while Massena gives up Bassano and withdraws towards Vicenza. But now Alvincy's advance becomes strung out, slowed by the heavy rain and poor fitness of his recruits. And it is against Napoleon's nature to remain passive for so long. As the Austrians cross the Brenta, he orders Massena to attack General Liptay's division at Fontaniva, while Augereau attacks Hohenzollern at Bassano. The French launched dozens of separate assaults. But for all their poor march discipline, the Austrian recruits stand their ground and fight hard. With around 3,000 casualties on each side, the Second Battle of Bassano is the bloodiest day's fighting so far in the Italian campaign, and a failure for Napoleon. Hours later, he receives dire news from Vaubois. During heavy fighting at Caldiero, some Croatian troops get behind the French line, triggering panic and a rout. Vaubois loses nearly half his division, killed, wounded or missing, before he can regroup at Rivoli. The French are falling back on all fronts, and unless Napoleon can conjure something remarkable, he seems destined to suffer a major strategic defeat. Napoleon's position is perilous, but his enemy's cautious pursuit affords him some respite. 4 whole days pass while Alvinczy and Davidovich coordinate their next moves. It's not a delay Napoleon would have tolerated if the shoe had been on the other foot. When the Austrians finally advance, it's bungled. Hohenzollern's vanguard approaches Verona to investigate reports of a French retreat. This isolated division is too tempting for Napoleon to ignore. He orders Augereau and Massena to attack. They inflict 400 casualties, but Hohenzollern escapes to a ridge near Caldiero. The next day, Napoleon orders renewed attacks. But conditions are atrocious. The French struggle uphill into driving rain and hail, their boots slipping in the mud, under fire from Austrians dug in on the ridgetop. Around noon, Colonel Dupuy's 32nd Demi Brigade finally gets onto the ridge. It looks like the French may be able to lever the Austrians out of their position. But then, the Austrian army begins to arrive in force to support Hohenzollern's hard-pressed division. The French are in danger of being outflanked on both wings. They take up new defensive positions. and hold the line until darkness, when Napoleon cuts his losses and orders a retreat to Verona. It has been an unequivocal French defeat, Napoleon's first in battle. The following day, he writes furiously to the Directory in Paris. He has no doubt that they are to blame for his defeat, for repeatedly failing to send reinforcements. We may be on the verge of losing Italy. None of the expected help has arrived. The army of Italy, reduced to a handful of men, is worn out. The heroes of Lodi, Millesimo, Castiglione and Bassano have died for their country or are in the hospitals. The men have nothing left but their reputation and their pride. We are abandoned in the depths of Italy. But despite his apparent despair, Napoleon has already devised a plan to strike back. A breathtakingly bold move that will spawn one of the greatest of Napoleonic legends. With the Austrians converging on Verona, Napoleon decides to risk everything on a daring surprise attack. Leaving Macquart to cover Verona, he will circle south with the rest of the army, cross the Adige River and swing north, threatening to cut Alvinczy's lines of communication and capture his artillery, baggage and supplies. Such losses will force Alvinczy to abandon his advance. Marching overnight, Augereau and Massena arrive undetected at Ronco. Augereau's men cross the Adige on a pontoon bridge and begin moving north. But with marshland on all sides, they have to stick to the narrow, raised causeway, just 20 yards wide. And when they reach Arcole, where they must cross the bridge to continue north, they find it held by 2 Croatian battalions. Horribly exposed on the causeway, and under heavy fire, the French troops take cover behind its reverse slope. Reinforcements are sent up, but they too are pinned down by the weight of fire from the far bank. Colonel Lannes had discharged himself from hospital that morning in order not to miss the battle. He now attempts to lead a charge, but is hit in the leg. The fiery Augereau refuses to accept defeat and orders another attack. But his men are exhausted and demoralized, with 3 generals wounded. The attack at Arcole has stalled. When Alvinczy hears gunfire from the south, he assumes the French are making a feint to divert him from his own planned attack on Verona. But then comes alarming news that the French have crossed the Adige in force and are behind his left flank. He sends 2 brigades to attack the French bridgehead and diverts Mitrovsky to reinforce Arcole. Massena's division, moving northwest to protect the flank of the advance, runs straight into the Austrians at Bionde. At first, the Austrians have the better of it. But a disastrous friendly fire incident triggers panic, and Massena drives the Austrians back up the causeway. Napoleon is increasingly concerned by the hold-up at Arcole. If they cannot break through, Alvinczy will have ample time to redeploy and prevent any advance. He now orders General Gueux to take 2 regiments, cross the Adige at Albaredo, and lead them up the eastern bank of the Alpone River to hit Arcole from the south. He himself rides to the bridge to try to get the attack moving. He finds hundreds of French troops sheltering behind the causeway, unwilling to face the Austrian fire. General Augereau grabs a standard and begins to advance. This highly romanticized depiction was painted 2 years later. "Grenadiers," he cries, "come and seek your colour." In reality, none had the courage to follow him. Then, the commander of the Army of Italy himself draws his sabre, picks up a standard, and runs forward. There is withering fire all around. Several men fall wounded. His aide-de-camp, Colonel Murat, is killed. Another aide-de-camp, a Polish officer named Sulkowski, recalls, "The soldiers saw him, and none of them imitated him. I was witness to this extraordinary cowardice, and I cannot conceive it." With the French infantry refusing to follow their officers, the assault on the bridge ends in abject failure. A well-timed Austrian counterattack drives them back down the causeway. In the rout, Napoleon's horse loses its footing. He tumbles into the swamp and has to be hauled out by his aides. That evening, General Gueux launches his attack on Arcole from the south. The defences are less formidable on this side, and his men fight their way into the village. Arcole, at last, has fallen. But that night, Gueux's men are ordered to pull back. Napoleon is preparing to retreat. If, as he expects, Davidovich has continued his advance down the Adige Valley, Napoleon must withdraw now or face encirclement. His bold maneuver appears to have failed. Then, at 4 a.m., Napoleon receives a report from Rivoli that changes everything. Not only does Vaubois still hold the town, he hasn't even been attacked yet. Napoleon's line of retreat remains secure for at least a few days more. It's all the reassurance he needs. He immediately cancels his retreat and issues orders to attack. Napoleon has lost the element of surprise, and Alvinczy is now planning his own counterattack. Overnight, his troops edge forward. Provera to Belfiore di Porcile, Mitrovsky back into Arcole. Both armies are on the move before dawn. Massena sends skirmishers into the marshland. When the Austrians arrive, bunched up on the causeway, they make easy targets. After a sharp fight in which an Austrian general is killed, Massena's men are driving the enemy before them. Augereau, however, cannot get close to Arcole. The causeway is still swept by Austrian musket fire and canister from across the Alponi. Napoleon orders troops to cross downstream at Albaredo, but the Austrians now have 2 battalions guarding the crossing point. French attempts to float or swim across the river come to naught. Day 2 of the battle ends in stalemate. Many soldiers have to camp amid the marshes and get what food and rest they can. Napoleon will try once more to break through, but he is running out of time. Davidovich, who by now has received several urgent requests from Alvinczy to advance, finally attacks on the 17th of November. Vaubois' outgunned division breaks. The Austrians take Rivoli and 1,000 prisoners, and nearly capture Vaubois himself. With Davidovich on the move at last, Napoleon must force a decision at Arcole or retreat. The bridge at Arcole has proved too tough to crack. So Napoleon switches tactics. Augereau's division will cross the Alponi and attack Arcole from the south in force. A column is sent 10 miles south to cross at Legnago, and then race back up the eastern bank to support him. Massena will advance up the causeway in support, while also protecting the left flank. That night, the French assemble a pontoon bridge over the Alponi. Augereau's division begins crossing before dawn. But at sunrise, Austrian gunners in Albaredo spot the bridge and score a hit, knocking it out of action. Only the 51st Demi Brigade is across, though it gamely begins to advance on Arcole. Massena's advance is also hamstrung by a broken pontoon bridge. To add to the crisis, the Austrians launch an attack on the fragile French bridgehead. Napoleon gathers every available gun to blast the Austrians, who fall back under a withering barrage. The bridges are quickly repaired. But as the French advance, they encounter stubborn opposition on both sides of the Alponi. A bloody seesaw battle surges back and forth along the causeways. Neither side can deploy its troops, nor gain an advantage. Around 3 p.m, the French column from Legnago arrives, threatening to turn the Austrian flank. Just as Arcole seems about to fall, the Austrians launch a ferocious counterattack across the bridge. Brigadier General Robert is killed. His troops fall back in disarray. The panic is contagious. Augereau's men lose their nerve and fall back to the bridge. The moment of crisis has arrived. But while the enemy has just used his last reserves, Napoleon can call on Massena's unengaged troops, including the elite 32nd Demi Brigade. Their sudden counterattack turns the tide. Massena's men sweep up the causeway, taking scores of prisoners, as Augereau's division resumes its advance. As they approach Arcole, Napoleon arranges a small ruse de guerre. 25 of his elite escort sweep in from the east, blowing bugles to feign a mass cavalry charge. In the evening light, it's enough to scare the remaining garrison into abandoning the village. As the French continue their advance, Alvinczy orders his exhausted, demoralized army to retreat east, to Montebello, to protect its lines of communication. The 3-day Battle of Arcole has been a messy, bloody affair, with no great tactical flourishes. Napoleon's margin of victory is narrow, and a third of his army are casualties. But he has done enough, for now. Alvinczy may be withdrawing, but Davidovich remains a threat. The next day, Napoleon sets off at his customary pace with Massena's division to reinforce Vaubois. Augereau takes a different route to threaten the Austrians' line of retreat. The confusion that follows between Alvinczy and Davidovich verges on farce. Alvinczy writes to his corps commander, informing him that he will support him by resuming his advance. But Davidovich, having heard of the defeat at Arcole and now directly menaced by Napoleon, is already retreating. On receiving Alvinczy's letter, however, he tries to turn his army around, leading to such chaos that he has to immediately countermand that order and resume his retreat. The end result is that both Austrian armies are soon withdrawing. And with exquisitely poor timing, gallant old Wurmser chooses this moment to launch his supporting attack from Mantua. He does at least secure some much-needed supplies, at a cost of 800 casualties. It has been a bruising campaign for Napoleon. By some estimates, he has lost more men than the Austrians. He has suffered his first defeat in battle, and won a costly, messy victory at Arcole. But he has beaten the odds and thrown back the enemy. What's more, his heroic conduct at the bridge at Arcole will soon take on a life of its own. Artists and pamphleteers turn a slightly embellished version of events into a sensational piece of personal PR that captivates France. With Napoleon's active encouragement, the world is witnessing the birth of the Napoleonic legend. A powerful force that will inspire loyalty and devotion for many years to come. For now, both armies settle into winter quarters, as December brings bitter cold and heavy snow to northern Italy. In Mantua, the Austrian garrison is near its limit. Starvation beckons, though Wurmser is determined to hold out to the last. The Austrians will have one last chance to save the city. A final offensive to decide the outcome of the war in Italy. January 1797. A new year, but familiar problems for 27-year-old General Bonaparte, waging war against the Austrians in northern Italy. He has the great fortress city of Mantua under siege. And after a narrow victory at Arcole, he's once again driven back the Austrian armies trying to march to its aid. But the French army of Italy is in a ragged state. Troops have not been paid for weeks. Their uniforms are disintegrating. Their shoes are broken. And above all, they're hungry. One of Napoleon's major concerns is the wretched state of medical care for his men. The hospitals lack everything. Our wounded are lying on the floors and in the most horrible state of destitution. It's not just a question of saving lives and getting wounded men back to their units. Medical care affects morale, as troops going into combat want to know that if the worst happens, they'll be looked after. Conditions are much worse for the Austrian garrison of Mantua, commanded by Field Marshal Wurmser. In 4 months of siege, 9,000 soldiers have died from disease, wounds, or the effects of malnutrition. Survivors live off horse meat, civilians off rats and dogs. Even these miserable rations will run out by the 27th of January, just a few weeks away. The clock is ticking. The Austrians must relieve Mantua by that date, or lose the city. and with it, the war in Italy. Napoleon, having received just 7,000 reinforcements, prepares to meet Alvincy's advance. He will not only be outnumbered, he doesn't know where his enemy will strike. And Napoleon must hold one division back to cover Wormser's garrison. It's commanded once more by General Serrurier, recovered from his long illness. Augereau's division watches the Adige, while Massena guards Verona. The Northern Division has a new commander. Napoleon has sacked Vaubois for his poor performance, and put in his place General Barthélemy Joubert. He is a hard-working, brave, and exceptionally modest commander, and, like Napoleon, just 27 years old. General Ray is in reserve, south of Lake Garda. General Alvincy has received 14,000 reinforcements, and orders to relieve Mantua as soon as possible. He is eager to march, but heavy snow and the late arrival of equipment and supplies delays his advance until the 7th of January. The first columns on the move are Provera and Berlich, but their offensive is merely a diversion intended to draw Napoleon's attention away from the main threat, which will be coming down the Adige Valley. Alvincy has divided this force into 6 columns. Their mission is to envelop and destroy Joubert's division at Rivoli and clear the path to Mantua. But Rivoli is a strong defensive position. They must hit it hard and fast before the French can respond. Napoleon, assuming any Austrian advance is still weeks away, has travelled to the Papal States with a column of troops commanded by Colonel Lannes. They intend to put a little pressure on the Pope, who continues to stir opposition to France. However, as soon as he receives reports of enemy movement, Napoleon races back to his headquarters at Rovabella. By now, Alvincy's forces have also begun to advance, but serious planning failures quickly emerge. Lusignan's first column, on the right flank of the advance, has orders to cross the slopes of Monte Baldo and attack Joubert from the rear. It's soon clear that these orders are wildly optimistic, dreamed up by staff officers who'd not seen the terrain. The peak of Monte Baldo is more than 7,000 feet high. Its slopes are covered in deep snow and ice. The paths are treacherous, even more so after dark, and there is no firewood for making camp. Only by taking a wide detour can Lusignan make any progress at all, whilst losing 200 men to exhaustion and exposure. Meanwhile, the 2nd and 3rd Austrian columns reach the French outpost at Ferrara. An initial attack is repulsed, and following their orders, they wait for Lusignan's column to appear before launching a second attack. However, Lusignan's column is not yet in sight. Alvincy's plan relies on swift, bold action, but just 48 hours in, it's falling apart. At Rovabella, Napoleon ponders the incoming reports. He knows that Joubert's forward outpost is under attack at Ferrara. that Massena has repulsed an Austrian attack on Verona, and Augereau faces a sizable Austrian force near Legnago, poised to cross the Adige. Is Alvinczy using the same tactics as before, making his attack from the east? Then, a second report arrives from Joubert. His scouts have detected an enemy column marching around his flank. He has no doubt that he faces a major Austrian attack and has begun withdrawing his forces to Rivoli. "The report I have given you is exact," he tells his chief. "Be assured, the enemy will make every effort to throw me onto the blockade of Mantua." The enemy's plan has been unmasked, Napoleon announces, and issues a flurry of orders. Massena is to march immediately to reinforce Joubert. Augereau is to send him cavalry and guns, while the rest of his division keeps watch on Provera. Ray is to move up to Castelnuovo. Serrurier is to be on high alert for an attempted breakout by the Mantua garrison. While Joubert, the youngest and least experienced of Napoleon's divisional commanders, is instructed to hold Rivoli at any cost, and assured that help is on the way. After giving the Austrians a bloody nose at Ferrara, Joubert has extricated his troops overnight and taken up a defensive position around Rivoli. Napoleon arrives around midnight and immediately sets out with Joubert to inspect the enemy's positions. The weather had cleared and the moonlight was superb. I climbed the different heights and observed the lines of enemy fires. They filled the country between the Adige and Lake Garda, and the atmosphere was ablaze with them. One could easily distinguish 5 camps, each composed of a column. Until reinforcements arrive, Napoleon has just Joubert's division, 10,000 men, to hold off 24,000 Austrians. But Alvinczy will help to even the odds by ordering Lusignan's first column to attempt a wide outflanking march to cut off the French line of retreat. And Napoleon decides the main road to Rivoli, which passes through a steep defile known as the Pontari, can be held by a single regiment supported by entrenched cannon. This leaves more manageable odds of 9,000 against 12,000 in the centre. But Napoleon wants to push out his defensive line to hold the slopes that mark the edge of the Rivoli plateau. At 4 a.m, General Vial's light infantry brigade advances through the darkness. They drive back the Austrian outposts and take the San Marco chapel. They're followed on their left by the rest of Joubert's division. But the French push too far. Skirmishes break out along the line, with heavy fighting on the heights of San Marco. Napoleon had not wanted to start the battle so early, but the combat escalates. At dawn, the Austrians attack the plateau in force. The French 85th Demi-Brigade is outflanked and routed by Liptay's second column. The 29th Light, on its right, is forced to retreat, and it looks like the French line is crumbling. But the 14th, on their right, fights tenaciously. It's an intense infantry battle across broken ground, vineyards and walled gardens, with sudden charges, hurried withdrawals, and counter-charges. When the Austrians overrun a French battery, an officer demands, "14th, will you let them take your guns?" His troops mount a ferocious charge that routs the Austrians and reclaims the battery. By 9 AM, Massena's troops have begun to arrive. They take up position on Joubert's left. The buckled French line is stabilized. But so far, the French have only faced half of Alvincy's 6 columns. One by one, the others now join the action. Vukasovic's 6th column is on the far side of the Adige River. But its guns cause havoc among French troops holding the Pontari. Under this covering fire, Royce's 5th column charges up the narrow road and in fierce fighting storms the French entrenchments. This advance threatens the entire French right wing with encirclement, and a retreat begins. Moments later, gunfire to the southwest reveals Lusignan's 1st column has reached Affy, poised to cut off their escape. The French situation is desperate. They are outnumbered, surrounded, and under heavy attack. Napoleon's staff look anxiously to their commander, wondering what miracle can save the army now. Sensing victory, General Alvinczy and his staff ride forward to urge his infantry on. Napoleon remains calm. He knows Alvincy's centre columns are near exhaustion and that they have no cavalry and little artillery support. He identifies Royce's column as the most immediate threat and orders Joubert to send every man and gun he can spare for a counterattack. General Leclerc and a 21-year-old Captain Lassalle then charge with the entire French cavalry, just a few hundred horsemen. Under this onslaught, the lead Austrian troops are driven back into the gorge. Here, they collide with the rest of the column coming up. Cavalry and infantry jammed together, some pushing forward, others trying to escape. Joubert's men pour fire down on them from the overlooking ridge. The final straw is the devastating explosion of an ammunition wagon. Austrian morale breaks. The survivors flood back down the road to safety. Napoleon now turns his full attention to the centre, where the exhausted Austrian columns have become spread out and disordered. The sudden appearance of French cavalry, supported by infantry and guns, sparks panic and a mass rout. Alvincy, who must have thought himself on the cusp of victory moments before, must join in an undignified race to the rear, spreading further alarm among his men. By 1 PM, the bulk of the Austrian army is in headlong retreat, leaving Lusignan's 1st column in an awkward position. Completely isolated, he begins a fighting withdrawal. But the arrival of General Rey's brigade in his rear triggers a rout. Fewer than half of his 4,000 men escape. Through tenacity, courage, and good fortune, the army of Italy has turned a grim situation into an astonishing triumph. French casualties are modest. Austrian losses are devastating. Over the next few days, 5,000 more Austrians are captured as they struggle back through the mountain passes. Napoleon will not be there to see it. He's received news that Provera has crossed the Adige and is marching on Mantua. It is a chance for him to strike one more blow against the enemy and to seal the fate of Mantua. Leaving Joubert in command at Rivoli, with orders to renew the attack at dawn, Napoleon races south with Massena's division. Provera has no clue of the disaster that's engulfed Alvinci's army, nor that the wolves now gather for him. He pushes on to Mantua, shadowed by Augereau, who snaps up his rearguard, 2,000 men taken prisoner. With just 7,000 left, Provera's only hope is to break through the French siege lines. First, he tries to attack San Giorgio. Formidable French defences and a powerful cannonade stop him cold. The next day, he launches a coordinated attack with Wurmser against French forces at La Favorita. But Napoleon has now arrived with Massena's division from the north. Wurmser's weak, starving men are forced back into the citadel, while a determined charge by the 57th Demi Brigade smashes into Provera's flank. With Augereau approaching from the east, Provera faces impossible odds and surrenders with his entire force. Wurmser's last hope of rescue has been crushed. He puts off the inevitable for 2 agonizing weeks, until, with all food exhausted, he finally accepts terms for Mantua's surrender on the 2nd of February. He and an escort will return to Austria. His 16,000 remaining troops become prisoners. Austrian losses in the campaign reach a staggering 44,000 men. After 8 months, the siege of Mantua is over. A victory that will soon be celebrated on the streets of Paris. But it is General Serrurier, not Napoleon, who takes the formal Austrian surrender. His commander-in-chief has already departed to take on his next opponent, the Pope. From Rome, Pope Pius VI has once more been agitating against the French. And so Napoleon marches south with 9,000 men to explain the new realities of power in Italy. At Faenza, General Victor's division sweeps aside papal forces, and Ancona is taken without a fight. The subsequent Treaty of Tolentino forces the Pope to give up Romagna, as well as 30 million francs and 100 works of art. Belatedly, Napoleon's victories persuade the Directory to back him in force. French armies stuck on the Rhine are ordered to send him reinforcements. Their 34-year-old commander, another rising star of the French army, is congratulated on his brilliant winter crossing of the Alps. His name is General Jean Bernadotte. On the 10th of March, With 70,000 confident, seasoned troops under his command, Napoleon goes on the offensive. He sends Joubert to invade the Tyrol, Massena to advance up the Piave Valley, while he leads the bulk of the army on the most direct road to Vienna. The enemy is scattered and demoralised. Even the appointment of a new commander, the Emperor's own brother, Archduke Charles, fails to restore morale. Charles is regarded as a military prodigy. He's 2 years younger than Napoleon and has defeated the armies of both General Jourdan and Moreau in Germany. But he does not have enough troops or time. He fights a delaying action at the Tagliamento River, but it ends in disaster when Bernadotte surrounds and captures 2,000 Austrians, 10 guns and 8 standards. The French pursuit continues, with Massena covering Napoleon's northern flank. He arrives at Tarvis in time to block the Austrians' retreat. In 3 days' fighting, the French take another 3,000 prisoners. Napoleon's troops outmarch and outfight the Austrians at every turn. But his situation is more precarious than it seems. The other French armies are only just crossing the Rhine, while his own supply lines are now overextended and vulnerable. Rather than withdraw, Napoleon continues to advance, while proposing to Archduke Charles that they open peace negotiations. The Austrians accept. 2 days later, both sides agree an armistice, and peace talks begin at Leoben. After 5 years of conflict, Napoleon's dazzling advance into Austria has brought the War of the First Coalition to an end. So ends Napoleon's first campaign, almost exactly a year after it began, 380 miles away on the shores of the Mediterranean. Negotiations at Leoben become the basis for the Treaty of Campo Formio, signed 5 months later. The Austrian Netherlands, roughly modern Belgium, formally passed to France. The Venetian Republic, invaded and systematically looted by Napoleon's troops, is divided between France and Austria. So ends the 1200-year history of the serene Republic of Venice. The famous horses of St. Mark are among its many treasures dispatched to the Louvre in Paris, to join its rapidly expanding Italian collection. The French part of Venice joins its other Italian client states to form a new Cisalpine Republic. The author of its constitution, Napoleon Bonaparte. It's an illustration of how far the 27-year-old general has come in just a year. Having waged one of the most brilliant military campaigns in history, many would say his best, he now dictates terms to kings and popes, summons new states into being, and nurtures his status as the most celebrated military commander in Europe. He has achieved all this thanks to formidable intelligence, relentless hard work, and inspiring leadership, which he has used to forge a unique bond of trust with his men. He's had luck, too, along the way, and been ably served by a group of brilliant officers, many of whom will be with him for years to come. For Napoleon still has many extraordinary things to achieve. His Italian campaign is just the first chapter in one of the most astonishing lives in history. A big thank you to PMF Productions for their help creating this series and charting Napoleon's movements across northern Italy. We highly recommend their YouTube channel, featuring their own detailed series on Napoleon's Italian campaigns, which you can find by searching PMF Productions or using the link in our video description. Big thanks also to our old collaborator, History March, for creating the battlefield maps used in this series. You can enjoy many more excellent military history videos on his own YouTube channel. Thank you also to artist Keith Rocco for kind permission to use his artwork in this series. You can find more of Keith's brilliant Napoleonic art via the link in our video description. And thanks most of all to the Epic History TV Patreon supporters who make this channel possible. Visit our Patreon page to find out how you can support our work, help choose future topics, and get ad-free early access to new videos.